on.
McBride was, of course, a regular contributor here at TNT up until his incarceration. Host Mike Ryan said his sentencing was a blow to those fighting for truth and accountability.
The only crime that he's done, in my opinion, because he told about bad people that had killed people, the only crime that he has done is hurt the feelings of incompetent bullfeds at the very top. And they are incompetent bullfeds, and they should have been fired on the spot because they didn't do their job looking after the Australian public and doing the right thing for Australia.
And we are being told a significant number of the 8.5 million computers that were hit by last week's global IT outage have been rebooted. This means there's still potentially tens of thousands of machines still waiting to be fixed 4 days after they went down. It was the biggest IT outage the world has ever seen. Airports, banks, hospitals, news organisations and other critical services held hostage by a defective cybersecurity update which had crashed computers running on Microsoft Windows. And the painstaking work of fixing the problem has often required a company's IT crew to manually delete the files on affected machines. The financial impact in Australia alone is expected to surpass $1 billion. This has been Matt Boyland with your TNT News Brief. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live. From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Muckrakers, the show where we deep dive into the biggest issues of the day with a perspective you can't find anywhere else. I'm Taylor Hudak, and today is Tuesday, July 23rd. Now, during this next hour, we will focus on political matters taking place stateside in America. We have a lot to discuss, specifically the outing of President Biden and the prospect of a potential Kamala Harris presidency, which, by the way, some expect may happen sooner than we expect. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-hosts, Andrew Eborn and James Freeman. So guys, I first want to just begin by discussing this letter, this statement or announcement that was released by the president. We know that after several weeks of speculation, the U.S. President Joe Biden may potentially exit the race due to a lot of pressure coming from all different angles, coming from the corporate media, the Democratic establishment. And now he puts those rumors to rest on Sunday when he issued a statement that he will no longer seek re-election for a second term. And he also endorsed Kamala Harris, and we'll get into her background a little bit later in the show. But I have to say, I found the handling of this entire situation quite odd, quite unusual. I'm curious if you two agree, but I'll explain first why I think that. I mean, I think this goes against the typical procedure. If we look at recent presidents who chose to not seek re-election, they usually made that announcement through the formal channels. They made a statement on video to the public. One somewhat recent example that I think of is LBJ during the 1960s. However, President Biden posted a statement to social media. He posted a statement to X, which I thought was kind of weird. I understand that we do live in a different world today where social media really dominates the news cycle, and it's how we get most of our information. But I felt that something like this, something this serious, this drastic, would be made public through an appropriate channel, but it wasn't. So many people are now left to speculate, is Biden really aware of what's going on? Who made this decision? Was he forced to make this decision? And with little answers with regard to how this all came about. It's left people to wonder what is going on. So James, I'll go to you first. Do you think this was unusual? What's your take on this?
I find it quite astonishing. I mean, look, I've been predicting that Biden wouldn't be the nominee since January, February. So I think it comes as no surprise to me that he's stood down. But yeah, the manner in which it's happened is very, very odd, isn't it? And there's people now saying that Biden hasn't been seen in public for, I forget how many days it is, but we're almost into conspiracy land, like with Kate Middleton. Is he even alive anymore? Lots of conspiracies flying around. But look, what I find even more, I guess, astonishing and quite alarming is that we are now potentially looking at a president, Kamala Harris, before the election, because there is a lot of pressure now on Biden. A lot of people are calling for Kamala to use the 25th Amendment to actually get rid of Biden. That would be quite astonishing. That really, really would. And, I guess my question then would be how that is going to affect the presidential elections. It really does throw the cat amongst the pigeons, because, I'm not sure that Harris really is a threat to Trump, given the status quo. But how will that impact things? Who knows? It really is proving to be a roller coaster ride, I think, 2024.
One thing I found interesting about the timing and all of this is that shortly before Biden was diagnosed with COVID, he said during an interview with George Stephanopoulos that he would reconsider seeking re-election, or that he would actually drop out of the race should he be diagnosed with a condition or some sort of ailment. And then I think about a day later or shortly thereafter, after he made this statement, he was diagnosed with COVID. And I thought that was very strange. And then just a few days after that, we get this announcement that he is no longer seeking re-election. Good points that you bring up about the 25th Amendment. Oh, yeah, I see.
Can I just make a further?
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, can I just make a further comment? It's quite the irony of this is actually quite astonishing, because, of course, a lot of people think that COVID and the emergence of COVID in 2020 was the thing that really threw the Trump election. So for COVID to re-emerge as the reason for Biden stepping down, the irony is absolutely delicious, actually.
I completely agree. Now, you bring up the 25th Amendment, James, and you have also brought this up a few weeks ago now, Andrew. So what is your perspective, perhaps, on the potential invoking of the 25th Amendment and Kamala Harris assuming the presidency earlier than we anticipated?
No, you're absolutely right. And we were the very first in the media, I think, to talk about the 25th Amendment. A lot of people hadn't even heard of it, which is basically the right to replace the president as and when he may be incapable of doing the job. But we also predicted on the Muckrakers, you'll remember, about would Biden's presidential campaign survive longer than the orange? And we worked on that sort of basis. It's been modified a little bit since then. But I can declare that the one that ran out of juice first was Biden, and the orange is still in the running. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But talking about timing, you're absolutely right. That's what Biden said. He was adamant that he was going to run, in spite of all the calls for him to step down from people like George Clooney and many others, and those close to him in the party. Even sort of 24 hours before the announcement came out, he was still saying he was going to run. And we knew at that stage that it was claimed that he had COVID. And we knew at that stage that he said, well, barring a particular illness, I will continue running. I find that timing extraordinary. And as you say in your opening, your brilliant opening, is the reality was it wasn't an official one. It wasn't on special note paper or anything. It really was just on a tweet. And it does sort of beggar all sorts of questions about actually who wrote that in terms of the language of that sort of stuff and what's going on behind the scenes. But the question, and this is coming on to the 25th, which I know we're going to do a deeper dive into later, the question of this, if he's not fit to run again as president in the campaign, then clearly he can't be fit to run till the end of his term, going all the way potentially up to January, can he?
These are my thoughts as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Congresswoman Nancy Mace is putting forward a resolution actually calling for Harris to invoke the 25th, saying if Joe Biden does not have the cognitive ability to seek re-election, he does not have the ability to serve the remainder of his term. I'm not quite sure how the processes work in Congress and what that resolution actually means in practice. But it's clear that there are some senior politicians in the US now calling for exactly that.
Right. Now, if we take a look exactly what happened on the days leading up to this decision when it was announced on Sunday, specifically Saturday and Sunday, that date that he issued this decision, there was a report in Politico that did contain some detailed information, which I found very interesting, and it raised even more questions for me as to who really made this decision. So let me just outline this for the listeners, and then I'll get you two to weigh in here. It says on early Saturday, Biden was still very much firm in holding on to the fact that he was going to continue to seek re-election in November. However, after a lengthy discussion with two aides who had been advising him for several years, he had changed his mind, and they presented him with some information regarding concerns from lawmakers as well as issues with fundraising, which you just touched on, Andrew. And then they said that on Saturday evening, the decision was already made. So he changed his mind within just a few hours by speaking with these two individuals. Again, this is according to a report in Politico. And then by Sunday afternoon at 1:45 p.m., Biden notified his closest aides within the White House that he was no longer going to seek re-election. And then it literally states in this article that just one moment later, a minute later, in fact, he did not notify anybody else, but he went to social media and issued this letter. So that tells me that that letter had been prepared for some time, I think, by somebody else. I think that's fair to state. And he just perhaps put it out there. So it's very interesting timing as to who's really making these decisions. But we know that the media in the past few weeks has been finally coming to terms with the fact that this is a president who has demonstrated time and time again that he is not fit for office. So what role do you think, James, that the media had in perhaps initiating this potential change in leadership within the Democratic establishment?
Oh, they've certainly had a part in the choreograph of revealing all of this. But listen, I don't believe a word of this. I think that senior Democrats have known for a long time, just as I have, that Biden would not be the nominee. I think this is a planned event they're going through now. It's been carefully planned. I don't believe any of the nonsense about COVID. I mean, he might very well have COVID, but I don't believe that that's just a coincidence if he has, but it's more than likely that he hasn't actually got COVID at all in the first place. But yeah, I don't believe any of it. I don't believe the mainstream media. I don't believe what we're being told. I think this is a planned event. And, you know, it really is extraordinary, isn't it? We've seen an attempt, an assassination attempt on the other candidate last week, and then we've got this. I mean, you know, it's crazy kind of world that we would see two big events like this within the space of 2 weeks. But you know, and so I don't believe in coincidences running like that. I don't think they come along like buses. So yeah, I don't believe a word of it.
Interesting. You know what, James? I agree with you on this. I have been questioning, has this been planned for some time in advance? And this is sort of the cover story. This is how they get him out of office in a way that doesn't shock or scare the public. Just my thoughts again, based off of the information that we have and sort of how the deep state operates. But Andrew, do you have any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, I think, and I've made this point beforehand, that all of those around Joe Biden must have known about his cognitive ability, or rather inability. And you hear about this sort of debate Viagra before he goes on, and how appalling his debate was against Trump in spite of that debate Viagra. And you see all these gaffes which are highlighted in the media, some of which are actually fake, and they're fake videos, but some of which are real when you see it in real time. And it's live television, you can't escape. My thought is exactly that. When you look at this sort of stuff, those people who knew about him basically have put him front and center, and they must have known what the reaction was going to be. So I think we're quite right to question the timing, quite right to question the motives behind it, and quite right, the shenanigans behind the scenes will all become very public very, very soon.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, we would hope for transparency, but unfortunately, we're not getting too much of it, especially if you look at the congressional hearing that was held just yesterday, where the United States Secret Service Director, Kim Cheadle, was supposed to be held accountable before Congress and the American people with regard to her handling of the assassination attempt against former President Trump. Perhaps we could discuss that a little bit later in today's show. But I do want to now take the focus towards Kamala Harris, because that is the person who is likely, it's not for certain yet, but that is who is likely to be in place to replace Biden. She has an interesting record. To be honest, it's quite unremarkable. But James, do you just want to give a few thoughts on Kamala Harris and her prospects for the White House?
Yeah, so I've been looking at some stats and been looking at approval ratings. And in the Los Angeles Times, they published some stats on this earlier this year. And she's got a net approval rating of -16. Although, to be fair to her, Pence at this point in his vice presidency had -19, and Biden under Obama had -10.6. So that might not tell us as much as what we need to know. But I think the one worry that they will have is that she does have a positive approval rating among Black voters. I think it's around 50 percentage points, a positive approval rating. But her net approval rating amongst female voters in the US is -10, which has got to be worrying, I think, the Democrats, because, I think that's one of the big sort of positives of the platform that she can stand on, is that, she could potentially be the first female president of the United States. Not so if you talk to American voters, though, even amongst Hispanic. She's only got an approval rating of +3, so not particularly popular there. The other real Achilles heel, though, I think for her is on immigration. Of course, she was appointed to be the immigration czar back in 2021. And to be fair to her, her remit was to support South American countries so that there wouldn't be such a push factor in terms of them coming to the United States. So she can't be held responsible for everything, but that is how it will be portrayed. She will be portrayed as soft on immigration. And of course, in the 2019 presidential, her race to be the Democratic nominee in 2019, she supported a policy of decriminalizing illegal migrants coming across the border. So she is quite weak on immigration. And of course, in that race to be the Democratic nominee, she had to pull out in the end because she ran out of money. So, she has got an interesting backstory over the past few years.
Absolutely. We have so much more to discuss regarding Kamala Harris, but for right now, we are going to cut to a short break. But as I said, when we return, more on Kamala Harris, her background, her history, her policy positions, as well as her prospects for the White House. You're watching The Muckrakers on TNT. Stick with us.
While serving in Afghanistan, I was hit by sniper fire. The fighting was so intense, the medevac chopper was barely able to land. In the hospital, I was given a 5% chance to live. It's a good thing math wasn't my best subject. Today, I visit classrooms and share my story. I talk to kids about dealing with life's struggles. I tell them, with a little help and a lot of work, that you can overcome any challenge.
DAV helps veterans like Adam get the benefits they've earned. They help more than 1 million veterans every year in life-changing ways.
I know that some struggles are big and some are small, but they're all struggles, and you have to learn to get through them. With support from DAV, more veterans like me can live their best life. And as a new father, I have one more reason to keep on keeping on. My victory is being there for the next generation.
Adam Alexander, may your victories inspire many more. Support more victories for veterans. Go to DAV.org.
The Light is Britain's far-right conspiracy theory paper spreading hate and vicious lies. No, that's what the BBC say. The Light is the only national newspaper bringing you the real news and informed opinion on what's really going on today. You can subscribe, order copies, submit articles, and read back issues on our website, thelightpaper.co.uk, and see for yourself why the establishment are so worried about the uncensored truth getting out to people every month. The Light Paper. Not far right, just right so far. thelightpaper.co.uk.
This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back. I'm Taylor Hudak, joined by my wonderful co-hosts today, Andrew Eborn and James Freeman. All right, guys, let's continue discussing Kamala Harris, who could potentially be the next president of the United States. That is, of course, if she wins the Democratic nomination, which we have yet to see. But before I hand it over to you, Andrew, I just want to outline a few details about Kamala Harris' background. It's interesting because she doesn't have an extensive history, in fact, in politics. So she began her career as an attorney. She became the district attorney of the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. This is in California, in the Bay Area around San Francisco. This was in 2003. She was elected as the first woman, the first African-American individual to serve as California's Attorney General. And then she was around at that time uplifted within the Democratic establishment, within the Democratic Party, was then promoted to become a senator of California. However, if you look at her record as a prosecutor, I mean, she has been criticized widely for this, I would say. And it seems that she is trying to use her record as a prosecutor as a strategy to campaign against former President Trump, and especially hit him hard on some of the legal troubles that he has had. Now, I would say that I think this is not a great political strategy because she has such a bad record that I think is a real turnoff to many progressive voters within the Democratic Party. But I don't know what other strategy she could really take when it comes to campaigning against former President Trump. She has been criticized for handing down very harsh sentences to individuals for low-level drug offenses, like offenses of using cannabis, which is now, I think, in some degree, legal in almost all 50 states. And then when she was asked about using cannabis, she laughed about it. And she's been widely criticized for this because, of course, she put people in prison for a very long time for the same things that she has done. That's just one example. There are numerous examples to point to with regard to her prosecutorial record. But Andrew, what do you think that will be and how that will play out in her campaign against President Trump? Is this a good strategy, a bad strategy? Do you think this is something that's going to turn off many of the American people?
I think I always make the point that whatever anybody says, whenever they say it, all the pictures, all the quotes, all the word salads, and we've got lots of those, will all be dug up and thrown into her. The one thing that they talk about as well is the pronunciation of her name, which people continue to get wrong. And she's spent an absolute fortune in the 2016 campaign, including getting lots of college kids to pronounce her name. It's actually Kamala, as in sort of comma, so like punctuation. So Kamala as opposed to Kamala or Cami or anything like that sort of stuff. And a lot of people got into trouble because they said it's racist, the wrong pronunciation. But that's what it is. It's like the punctuation. She's stopped Joe Biden and she's taken over. So it's Kamala. And apparently what happened, it means lotus, so which her mother named her that after the goddess Lakshmi. There you go. So lots of stuff there. What is interesting, she's going to peddle this a lot. She would be the first African American, the first woman, the first Asian American president in the history of the United States. And her motto is basically, you may be the first, but make sure you're not the last. So there are going to be lots of people, especially young girls, who will be inspired by that sort of stuff. That'll be the message. And she's also pitted herself as, look, she's the great prosecutor. And, well, here's the biggest felon in America is how she's sort of pitching it against Trump. So that's her sort of narrative. And that's going to get played out a lot. And the rhetoric that she had opening her campaign was referencing that very much so. So I expect to see a lot more of that. But as always, we've got to do a deep dive into who the person actually is. And you looked at that particular record. And there's a lot of questions to be answered there. And there's a lot of people she's going to upset as a result of her previous policies.
James, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think that is pretty much all she's got at the moment, as far as we're aware of, the fact that she's a woman. And of course, I think she'll make a lot of mileage out of all the comments we know, the misogynistic comments from Trump over the years. She'll definitely make mileage on that. And of course, the fact that she's a prosecutor, absolutely. But bar that, I don't really see where else she can go in terms of distinguishing herself from Trump. He will, of course, attack her on immigration and, and all. That's the other thing to remind ourselves here is that she has essentially got to carry all of Biden's baggage with her. She's been vice president. All of his gaffes are essentially her gaffes. And I think also she might be very, very weak on the fact that, she's been covering up, along with other senior Democrats, Biden's inability to perform. So I think that's where Trump will start, because she is part of the cover up which has gone on. She's one of the people who works closest with him. So she has undoubtedly been part of that cover up. So she's got big questions to ask straight away, even before we get on policy and all of that.
Right, exactly.
I was just going to say there was an interesting quote. I thought I might as well read it out for you. In her second appearance since Joe Biden dropped out in the 2024 presidential race, Kamala Harris attacked the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, saying, "Before I was elected as vice president, I was a common prosecutor," Harris said. "In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds." Big laughter from the crowd. "Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain." So hear me when I say I know Donald Trump's type. So you're going to expect much more rhetoric along that sort of lines as he distinguishes himself on that sort of basis. But in terms of whether she will win, in terms of this sort of stuff, I think we mustn't forget the point that we made beforehand about the 25th Amendment, because there's all sorts of possibilities that she could be declared president by default before the November election. And I do think, as we predicted here on the Muckrakers, that that's a narrative that's going to be peddled. As I said earlier, if Biden's not fit to run for the next campaign, then he's not fit to be the most powerful man in the world, allegedly, for those next 6 months.
All right, I'll just come in here with a few points as well, and then I'll hand it to you, James. Sorry, just real quick. I forgot to mention as well that Kamala Harris, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, because we know you can't get attacked for not getting it right. It's Kamala. Yeah, Kamala. She was actually referred to as Cop Mala, cop as in police officer, Cop Mala, during the 2020 primary, which she had to drop out of early because she was doing so poorly in the polls. But I just want to refer back again to some of her political history. I was reading in a report that 14 years ago, and it was 14 years ago, so not all that recent, but 14 years ago, she had a race against a Republican in her state of California, which is, by the way, very Democratic state, very blue. It's easy for her to win against Republicans, one would think, in the state of California. However, she ran against a moderate Republican, not very similar to MAGA Republicans, and she struggled to win over the California voters. In fact, this report states that this was her first race for California Attorney General, and it took about 3 weeks for her opponent to concede because the election was so close. It took that long for them to determine who exactly the winner of this election was. And I think that says a lot for her. She should have had an easy time running against a moderate Republican in the state of California, and she struggled. So it makes me wonder, is she up for this fight? Can she take this on? I do have questions about that. I see, James, you're eager to speak. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, like I said, I think we've all agreed, haven't we, that she will take the attack line as a woman, I think, and Trump's comments in the past and the fact that she's a prosecutor. But to be honest with you, that has been run to death on Trump over the past 18 months, and it hasn't really impacted his support. In fact, every time they throw these comments at him, his support seems to grow. The other thing that she's got on him, of course, is age. She is, I think she's 59 at the moment. Her birthday is in October, so she'll be 60 by the election. And I think, speaking to Americans, having lots of them on my show over the past year, I think the majority of the people that will support will decide this election, the floating voters, a lot of them actually didn't want Biden or Trump, two white old men. But saying that, she's younger than him, but she is prone to these gaffes, isn't she? Just like Biden. So, and now they're going to be dragged up and thrown. She's famous for giving these speeches where everybody is just looking around, scratching their head, saying, what did she just say? So I think, even her strengths, potential strengths, but, are kind of offset elsewhere by her, her gaffe-prone speeches. So, It's not going to be an easy ride. I guess the one thing that she has got on her side, though, now is the full machine of the Democrats and also all of the left-wing press. So, and she's only got to hold on for 2 months. So the strategy might be very, very choreographed, prepared, sort of
It was hard to navigate going to school, hundreds of kids, and I was the only one with a dying dad. He was diagnosed in March, and then he died in October. Towards the end, I heard about Canteen. It kind of felt nice to know that I had other people like me. They understood what I was going through, and we didn't even have to chat about cancer.
The presidency, I wondered, why would Republicans take that strategy? At first, that didn't make sense to me. But then it also does make me wonder, okay, that would then put Kamala Harris into this position as president. It would take away her time from campaigning, connecting with voters. And I wondered if that was perhaps a strategy to take up her time on trying to prove herself as a president for, say, just a few months or so. So that could be why they are talking about invoking the 25th Amendment. Of course, I think it would honestly be appropriate, given that Biden is really has proven himself to be unable to hold office and to serve the American people. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this point?
No, totally that. And as I say, not only those my thoughts is what we predicted here on the Muckrakers about 3 or 4 weeks ago about Amendment 25th. And I said it would start trending, and indeed it is now trending. And the reality is this, she will then, that's probably her only opportunity to be the first woman president, because I can almost guarantee she's not going to get the presidency when she runs against Trump. And to James's point, I mean, the media says that the more Trump, and I've got this wonderful cartoon which we had just to remind people in the press, the more people threw at Trump, the more popular he became. You know, it was extraordinary on that sort of basis. So he's prepared for all of this. He's the most brilliant media manipulator, because what he does, he tells his audience, he said, this is what they're going to throw at me, and they're going to throw it at me, and it's throwing at you, it's a threat to democracy. And so people just rally round him. And he also had, I mean, this is a brilliant thing, which again, I just sort of dug up the old newspapers. You remember when he was convicted, he had this glorious mugshot, which he then turned into a multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign. I think in the first few hours, he raised about $7 million. It's raised a lot more. So he's brilliant like that. He's predicting what's going to happen on that sort of basis. But you will look at what Kamala Harris says. And as I say, a lot of it's word salad. She talks about what can be unburdened by what has been, is one of her sort of favorite phrases that she keeps coming up with. People just say, what on earth is she talking about? So there's going to be lots of those sort of Biden moments from the new running person. So we're going to see what's going to happen on that sort of basis.
Yeah, and if I can just butt in quickly as well, I think as well as taking up her time, if she became president now, it would be an opportunity. She would have lots of opportunity to go to camera. In fact, she would find it very, very difficult not to be put under the camera, the scrutiny of the camera over the next few months. And I should imagine Republicans are rubbing their hands with glee about the prospect of that, because, you know, she's not a great speaker. She's not a great communicator. She does leave people very, very confused. And if she's got to speak at the moment with the complexity of American policy around the world and all the things that are going on, it's almost a certainty that she's going to make some slip-ups and some gaffes. So I think for those two reasons, as well as taking her time up and making it more difficult for her to campaign, I think Republicans definitely want her to become president.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things as well is that she's getting a lot of celebrity endorsements, particularly in the music industry. And one of her wonderful, the Harris quote is, "You think you just fell out of a coconut tree." Now, many artists have put that to a meme, and I check it out on the TikTok and various other platforms. But that's what they've got. That glorious speech that she made at a White House event last year on May the 10th, 2023. And that's the line. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree. And many artists have come out using that line. And also saying, look, they support her. So it's going to be interesting about the sort of the general vote of those in the media and see what happens.
Yeah, as I said at the start of this program, she's been historically very unlikable. As I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, she struggled to campaign effectively against a moderate Republican in a very left-leaning state. That would be California. So I think that the Democrats do have an uphill battle when it comes to putting her as their front runner. I do think that it will be difficult. However, I am also aware of the fact that there are many people out there, many big donors, and we'll talk about the donations and the funding in just a moment, probably after the next break. But there are a lot of people that want to support her just because they don't want Trump in office, and they feel compelled to just support the other candidate, no matter who they are. But still, when you have people who are on the fence, I think this will be a struggle. During her vice presidency, one of the key issues that she focused on was reproductive rights, which I understand that this does have a tendency to sway some younger voters, but generally speaking, this is not the make or break issue. This doesn't get people excited and get them out there to vote, I don't think. And I also think that Republicans should modernize their stance on this, but I don't think it's a good strategy to continue to focus on these social issues, because there are big things happening in America. There's also foreign policy to worry about, and those are the issues that matter more to people than some of the things that she has really focused on during her vice presidency. Do you agree with that, James, or do you have some additional insights?
Yeah, I think, look, all year, and it hasn't changed. I think this election is going to be won on the economy and immigration. I think I said on last week's Muckrakers that I've just been to the Caribbean. I've spoke to lots of Americans there, lots from New York. A lot of them were Democrats, and they were even saying they were considering voting for Trump and just holding their nose because of what the Biden's policies on immigration, what they've done to sanctuary cities like New York. It's absolutely devastated cities there. You know, there's nowhere to house people. It's costing residents billions and billions to fund all of this. So, and of course, like I said, Kamala Harris, rather. You know, we're going to get it right by the end of the show.
Right.
Kamala.
You know, she's weak on immigration, so I think that's where it'll be for. But the other thing that I'd add, Taylor, to what you just said about, you know, when she was running to be the nominee back in 2019, and she pulled out of the race. She actually pulled out of the race before the primaries because it looked like, even in her own state of California, where she was Attorney General at the time, she wasn't faring very, very well. So, you know, and that's usually a sign of somebody unpopular. It's very, very rare somebody goes on to be successful politically if they can't even poll well in their own state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my thoughts as well. Andrew, any other additional comments?
Well, what I quite like, and I make the point that everything will come back to haunt people. Within hours of the historic sort of stepping down from Biden, they dug out a check that Donald Trump had donated at an event to Kamala Harris. And he donated $5,000 on the 26th of September, 2011. And you can see that on social media. And it bearing Trump's distinctive signature and may be payable to one Attorney General, Kamala D. Harris. So all of that's coming back to haunt him as well. But as you said, we're going to be looking at the whole financing of her campaign and why letting her run means that she's going to have access to the millions of dollars which have already been raised by Biden.
Exactly. And it makes her the easier candidate, in my opinion, for the Democratic establishment to just put her up front because of this funding issue. She could use Biden's funds. And it seems that she's already been able to acquire a lot of money so far within just a 24-hour time span, which, by the way, I do find quite suspicious. We need to be questioning this, and we will, but we'll do that after a short break. Stick with us. You're watching the Muckrakers on TNT.
I'm Naheem Hines, professional football player and proud supporter of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. My mom was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy when I was 14, and I watched her struggle. But MDA helped her get the best treatments and care, and they also help kids like my buddy Ethan.
My name is Ethan, and I'm 12 years old. Thanks to the Muscular Dystrophy Association and people like you, I have more hope than ever before. From day one, they've treated me like family at my local care center. AMDA is the only one that funds over 150 care centers across the U.S. to help provide state-of-the-art care for adults and kids like me.
For over 70 years, MDA has been transforming the the lives of people living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and other related neuromuscular diseases. They fund the research for breakthrough treatments, care, and cures. And MDA provides support to thousands of families like mine and Ethan's in communities like yours. Thanks to MDA, kids and adults can live life to its fullest. Join us and learn more at MDA.org today.
Many pollution sources can affect the air you breathe, from power plants and vehicles to dust and wildfires. Knowing more about local air quality can help you protect your health. If you're thinking about buying an air sensor, EPA has a series of videos to help you get the most out of it. Learn how EPA collects and uses regulatory data, how EPA communicates health messaging, and how to interpret the readings from your sensor. Visit epa.gov/air-sensor-toolbox.
You're listening to the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back, everyone. All right, I want to pick up our discussion where we left off, in which we were starting to examine the donations, the funding of the Kamala Harris campaign. Before I hand it over to you two, I want to bring up a few points that I came across, which I thought were quite suspicious, which I alluded to before the break. But I've seen several reports stating that the Harris campaign had received as high as $81 million in just 24 hours. I've seen the majority of reports, though, cite a figure of about 46.7 million. So almost 50 million that she was able to raise in just 24 hours. When I saw that figure, I thought, okay, this is very strange. How was she able to pull that off in just 24 hours? Something has to be up here because she is such an unlikable person. And it's remarkable to me that she would be able to raise that much in such a short amount of time. However, looking further into some of the details regarding this funding, I noticed that one of the organizations that helped act as a conduit for many Democratic Party candidates on a local and national level is Act Blue. And Act Blue has actually been involved in, they're one of the organizations that helped raise this almost $50 million for Kamala Harris. And there's many reports here stating how this was one of their a very monumental moment for this organization. This is a record for them in being able to raise donations so quickly. But looking at their history, it is very suspicious. There was, in fact, a report that was released by O'Keefe Media Group. This is formerly Project Veritas, in which they looked at Act Blue, and they were able to determine that their the FEC data showed that many senior Democratic voters were donating to Democratic candidates numerous times a year, and their names in their data, being their address, was attached to hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations, and they were donating almost 1,000 times a year to
Taking him abroad is it became a home. When I met Dakota, he had just turned 14.
You weren't there for the first this and the first that. I missed the first words, but we got a lot of other firsts.
Watching her say, "Oh my God, I cannot believe I got my license," and she's like, "I passed," and I'm like, "Girl."
See them grow. It is.
They chose to love us. They didn't have to. They chose us.
Are listed on the FEC as donating almost $200,000 to this Democratic candidate. Did you donate this much money? And all of these individuals said no. And you could tell by where they lived, they were middle working class people. They did not have the funds to donate $200,000. Some of them were said to have donated, according to this data, $30,000. They all stated they did not donate that much. Some of them also said that they would have loved to donate that much if they could, but they did not donate that much money. Some of them donated like $5 or $10 here or there. So this shows a clear manipulation of information when it comes to donations towards Democratic candidates. It's happening again with Kamala Harris. This has been all documented by O'Keefe Media Group. I would encourage people to watch the video on Rumble. It's really astonishing. And it does raise questions for me as to who is funding the Kamala Harris campaign. That $50 million could very well have come from a mega donor who wants to conceal themselves from the public because the public would be somewhat outraged perhaps by their donation to this campaign. So it just is a very interesting dynamic and parallel here James, any thoughts on the funding? I'm not sure if you've heard of this story, but what is your general take on her being able to raise so much money in a short amount of time?
Soros. No, excuse me, just gonna get my
I agree.
throat there.
that is your thought, covered in stuff.
Yeah, I think there's rumors going around that it will be something like Soros who's giving her the money. Look, I think the bigger question for me here is, or the biggest sort of discussion to be had is, it is way beyond time that America needs to sort out the funding of its elections, because it's ridiculous. Right. If whoever can get the most election campaign money is the party that will win the election. It's not surprising that there's lots of dodgy stuff that goes on with that process. So it doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I think one of the things we were talking about earlier, though, is saying that, one of the reasons that she has probably been left in place is because of this money, the fact that they've raised so much already, and it makes it very, very easy for her to just take on all that money. I think probably actually what's more likely that's contributed towards Harris being the nominee is actually the optics of removing a black woman when she's vice president and bringing someone else in, because apart from dare I say it, Big Mike, Michelle Obama, who are the other candidates from ethnic minorities who would actually potentially stand? And I think, Michelle has ruled herself out. I don't think that she would stand. So the optics would look absolutely horrendous, I think, particularly given it's the Democrats and all of their wokeism. I think that would be a pretty hard sell. So I think probably that's more the reason why Harris is the nominee, rather than making it easier just to transfer all of these donations.
That's a great point that you make here. I actually said a few weeks ago on this same program that I thought potentially Gavin Newsom could replace Biden as the Democratic nominee. However, it's looking like it's very well going to be Kamala Harris. I get your point about how it would be difficult to sort of switch her out. And I also think it's unlikely that he would be chosen as her VP, because they're both from the state of California. It's a Democratic state. It's an easy win for the Democrats. They're going to want to go for somebody who is, I think, from more a swing state, because that's a problem for them. New Mexico in particular, and I think Virginia they're also concerned about those two states, which is a whole other discussion. But Andrew, I saw you nodding your head when James was speaking. Are there any thoughts on the funding or the prospects of a
absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. So just to put it in perspective, the actual figures, and it's reported in all over the UK media, which shows the fascinating interest they have in Kamala. Looking at that sort of side, I know it's a tricky word. We will get it, Kamala. $81 million in the first 24 hours, and that's a record for campaign financing. And what people are saying is actually they were holding their money back until Sleepy Joe stepped aside. So there was probably a lot of that going behind the scenes. But I think you're right. We need transparency, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need to look at the whole funding of campaigns. What's also interesting, and I predict this will get a turn up of volume in the media, is Donald Trump and the suggestion that he might ask for some of his money back, having been spent already racing Sleepy Joe. And if Sleepy Joe has already pulled out of the race, then maybe he should get some of his money back. And I'm sure some wonderful lawyers will be advising him about the potential of that.
It's so funny you mentioned the British interest in American politics, because I was in the UK at the time actually covering the Assange case during the previous presidential election, not right at the time, but right before. And a lot of British people were asking me what my thoughts were. They were super interested. So thank you for bringing that angle of what the media seems to be covering. Just for some clarification as to the donations here. Yes, you're correct. That figure is in total, $81 million in 24 hours. I mean, that is just unprecedented. But the 46.7 figure that I referenced, that was through this Act Blue, which is being reported as their best of all time, or at least especially within the 2024 election, of raising funds, their highest amount of funds that they've been able to raise in such a short amount of time. So it's all very strange. You couple that with the points that you were making, James, as to Kamala Harris, her other characteristics that may make her a desirable candidate. But as far as her prospects to win the presidency, do you think this will be an uphill battle for the Democratic establishment? Do you think that Trump is going to have a difficult time campaigning against her? What is your perspective at this time?
Yeah, I think we've already talked about some of the pros that she's got, some of the strengths. I'm not sure that they're that much of a strength, really. Like I said, she's going to play the prosecutor, isn't she? And damn Trump for the things he's done, for his legal cases, the things he's said against women. But we've heard it all before. And as Andrew's chart showed, every time that stuff is thrown at Trump, he just gets stronger and stronger. So they have got an uphill battle. And looking at some of the polls, there have been some polls in recent days. There was a joint Economist YouGov poll that was ran from the 13th to the 16th that found Biden would lose to Trump 41% to 43%, while Harris would perform slightly worse, losing 39% to 44%. It's not the only poll. There's a CNN SSRS poll conducted on June the 28th. Well, it was run on the 28th to the 30th of June, where Harris outperformed Biden, but actually lost again to Trump in that poll by 2 percentage points. So, you know, I think they are going to have an uphill battle. But look, we don't know who the vice, the running mate for Kamala is yet. I think that could have a big impact. Obviously, Vance has been a very, very smart choice, I think, for Trump, because he plays to those Rust Belt states, those swing states, to blue collar Americans. So it'll be interesting to see who Kamala chooses for her running mate. But look, unless things change, and look, you know, we knew 2024 was going to be volatile. We knew it was going to be frothy. I'm saying unless things change, I think she's going to lose. But who knows in this crazy year of 2024?
It is interesting because you raise about running mates, and a few names that I've been looking at, doing a deep dive. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, I reckon, is going to be quite good because obviously that's one of the key battleground states. I was also looking at Arizona, Mark Kelly. There's Kentucky, Andy Bashir. All of those. Gretchen, I think, might also, but Michigan governor over there, and J.F. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, all of those, and Gavin Newsom, I think you mentioned him as well, and Wes Moore. I think all of those could be very interesting, maybe even Roy Cooper and Tim Walz. But having a look at that sort of side, the running mate will be key because J.D. Vance, as I say, he was a non-Trumper. He said he was definitely a never-Trumper, is what he said. He called Trump a potential American Hitler, and back in 2016. And as I always say, there's nothing more persuasive than a convert. And what he handled the media brilliantly, I thought, because what he did, whenever he raised all these quotes that he made about Trump previously, he basically said, well, that was my thoughts about Trump then. I then saw what a brilliant president he was. And also, I realized that the media have been lying about him, and therefore I'm pro-Trump now. So I thought he handled that very well, but it's a very cool choice. I think J.D. Vance, who's at 39, basically he's got a young age on his side, and Trump has got experience of media manipulation, the maestro of that, also in their camp. So I also think, just dealing with one final point, that a lot of people are saying actually they're turning around Kamala, sorry, you've got me going now, Kamala Harris, turning around. She's been put in there now because they're really looking at about 4 or 5 years' time. They've assumed they've already lost this one.
Very interesting. Let me disagree with, just quickly, I agree with so many points that you both are making about J.D. Vance, but I gotta say, since the last episode we did where we went into some of his history, I dislike him even more. I understand the choice, the strategic reason to select him, given that he's from Ohio. He seemingly can relate to the average American. And I do agree that there is some power in having somebody who's a convert, who was once anti-Trump, now being his VP. I get the strength in that. But his connections to Palantir, which is a company that gathers data on dissident Americans to then be used by the intelligence services, I mean, that is so dangerous to me, so problematic. The money coming from Palantir into the Republican campaign is deeply concerning. And I think that that choice was not a good choice. But unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people, a lot of voters don't know this. And I hope that they'll wake up to this reality. James, I see you're eager to give some pushback on that. So I'll hand it to you.
No, I'm not going to push back on that, but I see the clock running down. So I'm just going to quickly get this in. Interesting comments from Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He wrote on X, President Obama is seeking his 4th term as president. Obama has been running the White House and will continue to run it with Kamala. So some interesting comments there from him, because of course everyone's known that Biden hasn't been running the White House. So the big question has been who, and of course Obama is going for a 4th term apparently.
A glorious idea, isn't it? I still like the idea of Mike maybe coming out, and that was one of the predictions on one of the papers over here, the Daily Star. They went to an asparagus psychic. I didn't know there was such a thing, and they predicted that Mike Obama would be coming in. But that would be interesting to see that happens. I don't think it's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is Kamala, as she says, it is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. A glorious Harrisism, which he's got.
James, any last thoughts here?
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, Michelle Obama might run in the future, but I think given that, we've got a couple of months, I think she would probably want to have a full campaign. I think, I don't know, I'm kind of contradicting myself a bit here, aren't we? Because we started off by saying that this has been planned for ages, and now we're talking in the context of it's just this big mess that the Democrats have been left with.
Right.
Like always, we don't know, do we? Because the media lie and muddy the waters. So I think that's the big takeaway is we just don't know what's going to happen over the next few months.
Exactly. We don't. I go back and forth. Is this a big plan that is being executed now, or is this a big mess that we're seeing unfold? I do want to end with a few important points. Of course, these discussions are really relevant if we take the understanding or perspective that our elections are free and fair. And I have questions about that. I am not so sure that our elections are free and fair. If you look at the previous election in 2020, it seems that there was absolutely manipulation. And also, we have a $34 trillion debt in the United States. We have a foreign policy, industry, military, industrial complex that is destroying the country and other countries throughout the globe. These are real issues that I am concerned about will not be solved by either of these candidates or through electing our way into positive change. So I would just leave people with that. We did discuss a lot of things related to the election in the U.S., but real change starts with the decisions that we all make here today. One of them is by accessing truthful information that is not beholden to corporate power structures like TNT. So please make sure that you support us. Keep watching the Muckrakers. We'll be back at it tomorrow at the same time. I'm Taylor Hudak. I want to give a big thank you to my co-hosts, James Freeman and Andrew Eborn. You all have a great rest of your day and take care.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live. Now, TNT Radio News.
With your hourly news brief, I'm Matt Boyland. Fears are growing for the safety of jailed Australian military whistleblower David McBride. He's been moved into a high security prison and spent over a week in isolation after receiving multiple death threats. The 60-year-old was jailed for more than 5 years back in May for exposing alleged war crimes committed by Australian forces in Afghanistan. And while the whistleblower who exposed the crimes sits in prison, not a single soldier has been jailed. Speaking with TNT's Mike Ryan on Monday, McBride's lawyer Eddie Lloyd said it's a travesty of justice.